On Friday, June 24th, I had the distinct honor and privilege to be the first person to read these words out loud in front of the Supreme Court, in front of dozens of TV cameras that were mere inches from my face. The Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey are overruled. Before I even finished reading these words, hundreds of pro-life students who were behind me, who were surrounding me, began weeping and cheering. A few feet away, beyond the security guards that we had hired to ensure our students' safety, those who were pro-legal abortion began to scream and yell in anger. In the days and the weeks after that moment, we have seen abortion facilities continue to shut their doors. Some states have acted with courage to protect women and children from the predatory abortion industry. We are up to 15 states. Next week, next Tuesday, actually, South Carolina may vote to become the 16th state. The Charlotte Lozier Institute has estimated that in 24 states that have enacted either total prevention acts or near total prevention acts for abortion, that more than 200,000 children who actually had a death date, who were scheduled to die, will be born this year. 200,000. We are no longer living. I find this fact fascinating. We are no longer living in a nation where abortion is an uncontested norm, endorsed by the highest court of the land. It's crazy to even think about that my daughter and my sons will grow up in a state like millions of other young children where abortion is not available. They will go to college, intermingle with students and young people from other states who will say, well, abortion's legal in my states, and my children will say, really? It's legal to end the life of a child simply because of their location or their convenience factor? The impact of such a cultural change, I don't even think has yet to even be studied or measured. Social scientists haven't even started measuring this. I think the impact of seeing Roe versus Wade reversed, this 49-year-old decision reversed, will have a tremendous impact on our generation. We're a generation who's never known a nation without legal abortion, who's always known there's been this debate going on, but we've been shown that transformation is possible if there's people willing to stand up. For the first time in our country, for the first time in our lifetime, we're actually having a real conversation about abortion. A conversation that 7 men in 1973 attempted to silence. And the debate now isn't if we will protect children from the predatory abortion industry. The debate is when. And that actually is not a playing field the abortion industry can win upon. Because the debate's not if, it's when. And they know it. This is why the debates you engage on or you've seen on social media, the debates we've engaged in and you see on cable news, any debate about abortion in the public discourse, you will see those who advocate for legal abortion intentionally talk about anything else besides the humanity of the preborn child, which is, in fact, our central argument as to why abortion must be made illegal throughout all of America. Instead, especially on social media, you'll see a mix of mean and ugly comments about those who value human life. You'll see a lot of fear-mongering, lies aimed at gaslighting women who've endured horrific miscarriages, trying now to convince them that while a natural miscarriage is labeled by the medical community as a spontaneous abortion, therefore you're a part of our movement. So even if you're against abortion, you had an abortion. That's the discourse we're having. We all now have these scare tactics online that women who face medical emergencies, life-threatening medical emergencies while they're pregnant, are at risk for death and the pro-life movement is somehow relishing in that or want them to die or pro-lifers are okay with them to die. This is 100% false. So I do want to start tonight. I don't know where everyone stands on the issue of abortion. To know that, if you disagree with me, one, there's going to be a great Q&A. You can ask me anything later. I already ate, so I'm good. So we can stay as long as we want until they kick us out. But if you disagree with me on this issue, know that the arguments that I'm making tonight are not against you. The arguments are against abortion. And when I say make abortion illegal again, I'm speaking out of a place of true concern. Concern for the preborn child who is violently killed in a direct abortion, as well as for her mother or his mother, who is paternalistically told that her empowerment and future success relies upon her willingness to subjugate another human being and to have access to a special surgery to pay someone else to end the beating heart of her child. And I'm speaking for all of us, because with nearly 60 million abortions in our nation's history, we're all affected by abortion, whether we realize it or not. For the belief that some basic human lives don't matter enough to protect them from death because of their size or their location, their predicted IQ, or their genetic code, or even who their parents are. That's a dangerous, extremist belief that has permeated our society. It affects all of us, as it's reflected back time and time again in our lack of concern as to what's happening at the border or on the streets of Chicago, or the impending famine in Africa and across the world that no one seems to care about or even talk about. The deaths of our siblings, our cousins, our neighbors, people we should know and who would have positively impacted our world and our society, that affects us all. Because whether we like it or not, we are not the same without them. The mainstream belief that some women will not succeed without killing their child, that also affects us. But I get it. Some people are very nervous, are very fearful about what happened when the Supreme Court reversed Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton. This is my first time on campuses this month since the reversal of Roe. And, I've been tracking closely the media reports and the pop culture narrative about the decision every day since it was handed down. And what most powerful institutions in our society want you to feel right now, especially women, is fear. For them, fear is a powerful motivator. It's a perfect voter distraction technique. We saw it exemplified this week in Ohio, where U.S. Senator Tim Ryan was debating. He had two main talking points in his debate: January 6th and abortion. J.D. Vance was bringing up things like the fentanyl crisis. He was bringing up things like the fact that gas prices keep going up, how we have a 40-year high in inflation, how families are worried, how there's a recession coming, or there is a recession, depending on your definition of recession, and people who can't define things have a hard time with that. He was bringing up legitimate geopolitical concerns we have. The fact that our president said we're closest we've ever been to nuclear Armageddon, which is kind of a big deal, but we need to talk about abortion. That was the issue of concern. We gotta fear that. We can't let fear distract us, though. We can't let it distract us from seeking the truth, from rationally investigating the claims made by those who preach intolerance against the inconvenient person, who advocate for violence against the smallest among us. So that's what we're going to do tonight. The second line of the Supreme Court Dobbs v. Jackson decision that was announced on June 24th, the one that no one heard me because the yelling was too loud at that point, was, and the authority to regulate abortion must be returned to the people and their elected representatives. The majority then went on even to say Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. What does this mean? Contrary to popular belief and what we hear on social media, With the Dobbs decision, the Supreme Court did not pass a law making abortion illegal nationwide. The court correctly acknowledged it was wrong to do what it did in 1973 to invalidate the dozens of state laws, pro-life and pro-choice. They said that was wrong to do, but they didn't make a national law. I find it very interesting that when we actually debate abortion, people like to debate with me about what Roe versus Wade was, what Doe versus Bolton did, what Dobbs v. Jackson said, as if I don't do this every day for a living. I actually would have been very happy to see the Supreme Court in Dobbs v. Jackson saying, no, every human being in the 14th Amendment, we know every human being has a right to be born. But the Supreme Court didn't say that. They said this decision is returned back to the people, back to the legislature, making abortion not only a state issue and a local issue, but also a federal issue, but for the legislature, not for the courts. And this was a hard decision to get to. It took 50 years of protests, educational campaigns, political strategy, political victories to get us to June 24th. But again, it wasn't a total victory for the pro-life movement because the Supreme Court did not outlaw abortion. We would like to see the Supreme Court uphold laws that outlaw abortion. We can't wait to get to the point where we have a federal protection measure in place, a Life at Conception Act, then moving on to a federal amendment to our Constitution. That's been our mission from the beginning. A lot of folks tend to ask us, what's our real goal in the pro-life movement, where we're trying to go? We've actually been very upfront about it. We don't want there to be any abortions. Like, I can't make it any more clear what our mission is in the pro-life movement. I mean, that's why we do it. And I did it in Trump font just to get everyone's attention, okay? You can't make it any more clear. Our goal has always been to see abortion made illegal, but it's also unthinkable as well. That means at the city level, preventing Planned Parenthoods from building new predatory businesses. That means protecting children via state law at the moment of conception. That does mean federal laws. So, will we get to these lofty goals immediately? No. I've seen a lot of news articles, and they've been written quite, very much on purpose before November, saying the pro-life movement has lost momentum. We saw this great victory they perceive a great victory, but now they have failed to accomplish their ultimate vision. It's been like 3 months. I think we actually have done a lot in 3 months in the pro-life movement, with 15, almost 16 states, with an estimated 200,000 lives who will be born. We have lofty goals, and we know it's going to take decades to reach those goals. And it's going to be hard. We will face continued death threats, continued rape threats, vandalizations of our pregnancy centers and our churches, with a weaponized DOJ that doesn't prosecute any of them, but then goes and arrests a concentration camp survivor for praying too closely to the doors of an abortion facility last week. But I think it's fair for those who are outside of our movement to kind of ask the question of us in the pro-life movement of why? Why do we care so much? Why are we willing to endure what we endure? Why? And I think it's common, we see from those in the pro-abortion movement, how they ascribe our intentions. There was a whole book written not long ago by the president of NARAL, Pro-Choice America. It used to be called the National Association of Appeal Abortion Laws, which was founded by two men in the 1960s. But whatever, her book, with the entire premise of the book, I got it because I was in it, so I wanted to make sure what she said about me. But the entire premise of the book was that the pro-life movement, yes, the pro-life movement is led by a bunch of women. All these national organizations are led by women, but we are just simply puppets. Puppets of the powerful white men who serve on our board of directors. They're the ones really pulling the strings. And it's because of religious reasons they want to enslave women. They have to have control of women's bodies. And these women who are somehow find themselves in the pro-life movement are also equally religious and religious zealots like them, and they are totally okay with it. I mean, it's almost laughable, these conspiracy theories that are now promoted by the academic mainstream. Academic and activists alike promote these theories. It's crazy. You never hear the pro-life movement talking that way. Why do we really care this much? Why are we willing to work hard and know and engage in a battle which we know is going to take probably decades more to make abortion unthinkable and unavailable? The simple answer is this. Abortion must be illegal because of what it is. The direct and intentional killing of a preborn human being. Let me say it again. Abortion is the direct and intentional killing of a preborn child who is unique, who is whole, who has never existed before and will never exist again, whose existence began when a part from his or her mother met with a part from his or her father, uniting, creating a brand new genetic code that was distinct and whole and self-directed. We know it's alive because it's growing. Cells are reproducing. Dead things don't grow in coordinated manners. We know it's a human being because like begets like. No matter how many times I have sex with my husband, or what position it may be in, or what time of the month it is, I can only reproduce a human being. I can't get pregnant with anything else. So we know what is inside of a woman is in fact a member of our species. And if you're pro-life, sometimes you laugh when you hear this because you're like, duh. But it's not that simple to many people. 96% of biologists agree that life begins at fertilization, when egg and sperm unite, when two parts create a whole. When else would it begin? I had a student at the University of Cincinnati last week tell me, we don't know when anything's living. There's no one definition of living. That is a scary, scary world that gentleman is living in. Because then I asked him, can I kill you if I say you're not living? And he said, well, that's a good question. The answer was no, because he definitely was alive. His cells are reproducing. He can reproduce. He can respond to stimuli. He can take food and turn it into energy. That is, in fact, the definition of life. You giggle, but this is not funny to many people who are very confused. But that is the entire thing. That's the big secret that people want to know about who pro-lifers are. Why do we care? Why do we go out to the Women's March and counter the Women's March and get yelled at and have our students get threatened to be raped? Why do we do that? It's not for the fun of it. It's because there's a human being at stake. And we know it's a human being because science tells us it's a human being. And we believe in the pro-life movement that killing human beings is wrong. Killing innocent human beings is wrong. Abortion kills an innocent human being, therefore abortion is wrong. There it is. There's the big secret. That is it. A natural miscarriage is not an elective or a direct abortion. An early delivery to save the life of the mother is also not a direct abortion. Removing a child who has implanted into the mother's fallopian tube and not the uterine wall, which is a life-threatening ectopic pregnancy, is not an elective abortion. Why? Because these things, whether it's natural miscarriage or early delivery or removal of a woman's fallopian tube to save her life, these things are not about directly, intentionally killing a human life. In miscarriage, a child dies through causes that were not intended, were not carried out by the mother. In early delivery, you may need to deliver a child early in order to save a woman's life who can no longer be pregnant. But the intention of that early delivery is not to kill a child. No abortionist says, well, let me just induce a cardiac arrest and let's let that child live inside of you for 2 days while we make sure that medication takes effect, and then we'll do a C-section. No, if her life is at risk, the C-section is now. The same thing with ectopic pregnancy. And this gets to my next point. With all of the misinformation that's spread online, I do think we need to back up our conversation to ask people, what do they think abortion really is? I think it's only fair, if we're discussing abortion, that we make sure that all parties know what abortion is. I don't think it's a very meaningful discussion when one person doesn't know what abortion is. I've already given you the definition, but I want to show you a little bit and tell you a little bit about how they're carried out, because I do think this is important. No one likes this part of the presentation. I don't have images to show you. You can Google those. You go to Harvard. Apparently you're smart enough to do that. Apparently. But this is important. Half of all abortions today are committed using pills. Chemical abortion pills, at-home abortion. These are supposed to be used to the 10th week. We know, according to Planned Parenthood's own website, that they're using them longer than what the FDA has allowed. But it's a two-drug method. The first pill, mifepristone, is a synthetic steroid that will block progesterone, which allows the child to grow, which feeds the child, nourishes the child. That pill stops the nutrients from getting to the child and the child from being able to grow and sustain life. The second pill, mifepristone, is intended to induce contractions and expel a dead body. 2-drug cocktail. She is told she doesn't have the abortion at the abortion facility. She takes the first pill. Used to be she took it at the clinic after they tested her to make sure she wasn't Rh negative and to make sure she wasn't having a life-threatening ectopic pregnancy. Because of the abortion industry's use of the COVID crisis, now she can take that first pill at home without confirming she's not Rh negative, without confirming she's not experiencing a life-threatening ectopic pregnancy. By the way, if she's at Rh negative and she has the abortion and she doesn't get the Rogaine shot, she may never be able to carry another child to term again. That's something they don't talk to you about. But any woman who's ever had a child knows you really need to know if you're Rh negative. It's very, very important when you're pregnant. She is told to abort the child in the toilet, that you will bleed, and if bleeding gets too much, sit on the toilet and flush and do not look. The bleeding can last 2 weeks, longer. 15% of chemical abortions fail to completely expel everything from the woman, whether it's parts of the child's placenta, the organ that the child directs the woman's body to grow. So she'll have to go back for a surgical abortion. 5 to 7% of women who undergo these abortions will end up in the emergency room. Suction abortion is used to be the most common type of surgical abortion in the first trimester. This is after dilating the cervix, a suction curette, which is inserted into the cervix. It has a powerful suction apparatus, and 29 times more powerful than a household vacuum cleaner, which will tear the child's body apart and suck it through a hose that is attached to just a plastic container at the end of the table. This is the most common type of surgical method, and it is very efficient at ending the life of a child at this stage, as the child is very, very small. Now, the child has fingers and toes, and the child is a human and looks like a human, but the child is still very small. The most common type of second trimester abortion. These are legal here in Massachusetts. They're legal in many states. This is what we often often hear these abortions never happen. No woman has a second trimester, a third trimester abortion. This is simply incorrect. Even though we lack a national abortion reporting law, we actually don't have, unlike Scandinavian countries and most countries in the world that have legal abortion, we don't actually have a national abortion reporting law because the abortion industry always fights against it. Ask yourself that, why? But we still know these happen because the abortion industry, most states self-report their abortions to the Alan Guttmacher Association Institute. Alan Guttmacher Institute is a Planned Parenthood's research arm. It's named after the second president of Planned Parenthood, Alan Guttmacher, who was also the president of the American Eugenics Association. You can Google that word if you don't know it later. But I'm going to show you what happens in a second trimester abortion. This is a fetal model for a child that's about 20 weeks. These abortions can take place 14 to 21 weeks. There's a video of a former Planned Parenthood abortionist in Arizona laughing about how you really can't commit these after 21 weeks when the skull bones are too well formed. But after dilating the cervix, what will happen is this Sofer clamp, which is really sharp and it actually hurts. And when it latches on, doesn't let go. You heard it. You see how it clicks. This will be inserted into the mother's uterus. The child is breech, and you just grasp, twist, and you pull. And you start with the legs, then you go to the arms, then the fetal trunk, and lastly the head. And you have to have it. This is about the widest it will go. So if the child is any bigger than this version of an abortion will not work. And then you insert these curette, a loop-shaped tip, and it just kind of scrapes the lining of the uterus to get the placenta, any fetal parts that may have detached that you didn't grasp, using the Sofer clamp. That's a second trimester abortion. You can go to the National Abortion Federation's website. They actually describe this on their own website for abortionists in detail, more detail than I went into. But you don't have to trust me. You can also, Google it. Third trimester abortions do happen. People, once again, generally do not like to think of them happening, or they'll say they're only done in certain circumstances. We know that over 12,000 abortions are committed a year after 12 weeks of pregnancy. That is what is self-reported to the Alan Guttmacher Institute. And if, there are a couple of thousand of these abortions that happen. And this is how they're committed. So this is kind of a needle that you use an amniotic when you're trying to get amniotic fluid. It's inserted through the mother's abdomen using ultrasound-guided technology. A drug, usually digoxin, is inserted as close to the child's heart as possible. This drug will cause cardiac arrest, a heart attack. The mother will have Lomeria, seaweed sticks, inserted into her vaginal canal to ripen her uterus, to open up her uterus. And she will go about her business for 2 days while her child slowly dies, or in the abortionist's case, hopefully dies. And she will return back to the abortion facility and deliver a dead child. Often we hear women need abortions. What happens about, the only time women have abortions later in pregnancy is their life's at risk. Yeah, this type of procedure carries a lot of risks for women. If a woman's life truly is at risk, what is done is an early delivery, not causing cardiac arrest. Now, I think if you hear these descriptions and you think to yourself, that sounds great, I'm all for that, you probably need some serious help. And I'm very serious about that. I would get help. These are horrific acts. These are violent acts. Because at the end of the day, an abortionist is not successful if his or her heart continues to beat. They only know success in their job if a beating heart stops. Think about that. But when we have these conversations or debating our friends or somebody on social media about abortion, these procedures rarely ever get talked about. They never get brought up. Instead, we often find ourselves discussing with most folks the circumstances in which pregnant women find themselves to justify why this type of violence should be illegal, why it should be celebrated, why it should be taxpayer funded. But we in the pro-life movement contend there is no circumstance or obstacle that she faces that she isn't strong enough to survive without choosing to pay someone to end the life of another human being. That's what we fundamentally believe in the pro-life movement. The abortion movement would have young women believe that they cannot succeed or experience freedom or get the education or achieve their career goals unless a child conceived along the way, unintentionally, is sacrificed. It's just part of the success, according to them. Now, coincidentally, there is a multi-billion-dollar industry that profits off of convincing any woman, that she has to do this. It's fascinating to me, so many folks who advocate for legal abortion are totally fine with those who get money and profit off legal abortion going into our schools teaching our sex ed classes. It's very much like Philip Morris being asked to go into our schools and tell children not to smoke. Doesn't quite work that way. Quite honestly, I can't think of a single more misogynistic or regressive thing than telling a woman in 2022 that she has to take the life of her child in order to succeed, in order to live out her career goals. The reality is we believe no woman should have to be forced to make that choice between her own flourishing and her child's life. And those who do choose abortion suffer the consequences, which I would argue is the second reason why abortion must be made illegal. The other dirty little secret of the abortion movement is that the thing they don't want you to know, besides what abortion actually is and what it does, is that there is a vast infrastructure of support, of care, of resources available to every woman and every man who finds themselves in an unplanned pregnancy situation. For 49 years, the pro-life movement has been supporting, sustaining an entire social safety net. There's nearly 3,000 pregnancy resource centers, pregnancy help organizations, maternity homes that exist in every community across the country. I have gone into, has anybody gone into Planned Parenthood pregnant? I have. These pregnancy help organizations offer resources that Planned Parenthood doesn't even lie about having. They offer well women care. Many of them will help her sign up for WIC and walk with her. They offer parenting classes. They offer post-abortive healing support. They offer maternity clothes. They offer diapers and formula and anything she and her child needs, usually up to 2 years after the child's birth. There's maternity homes where a woman and her children can live for free during and after her pregnancy. There's nonprofits that help birth mothers find the perfect adoptive family for her child and ensure she doesn't pay for any of the medical expenses during her pregnancy. We at Students for Life have an entire initiative called Standing With You. The entire goal of that initiative is to inform her that we do in fact stand with her. To list all of the comprehensive private and public sources of nonviolent health care and support for her out there. To help Students for Life groups and other pro-life groups on college and high school campuses challenge the status quo on the campuses. To transform the campuses so no woman ever again feels like she has to choose her child or her education. To enforce Title IX, which has actually been designed to protect her. To help pregnant athletes know that they won't lose their scholarships. They can't have their scholarships taken away from them simply because they're pregnant. Which I will tell you, many of them do not even know this. There's no justification. There simply is no justification for ending another human being's life the way I've just described to you. There's no foundation in the abortion movement's claim that women need abortion in order to succeed. They absolutely do not. I want to end with A final word about our fight to make abortion illegal again. I was told for a number of years by pro-life activists and friends and pro-abortion activists that I was cray-cray for believing that Roe versus Wade could be reversed. That was crazy to even say that. Crazy to work towards that. It's not crazy. It wasn't crazy. I was right, by the way. I actually think it's not crazy. I think it is crazy to not see that making abortion illegal again and abolishing it is exactly where we're headed. Those protesting us, those calling in the death threats, wishing we were raped, they actually see it just like I do, that we are headed in that direction to make abortion unthinkable and unavailable in our nation. It's not crazy. And the human rights movements of our past testify to this fact. But change does take time. Reversing Roe was the catalyst that we've been working for to propel us into phase 2 of our movement. It took 5 decades to get here. And then hopefully, as I mentioned before, it won't take that much longer, but it may take a couple of decades more. Transforming culture in our country is not easy. It took 99 years from the end of the Civil War, the signing of the treaty at Appomattox, to the signing of the Civil Rights Act. But our entire movement is in it for the long haul. But I think we have to understand this is going to be a long haul. And I hope you all are prepared for that. This isn't going to be quick. The day after the Emancipation Proclamation, we didn't have a black president. The day after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, we didn't have a female Speaker of the House. I wish we never had a female Speaker of the House, but we didn't get to that point. The day after Roe, we didn't see disenfranchised preborn human beings guaranteed throughout our country the right to live. Our nation has made this mistake before. We've made the mistake of disenfranchising people because we perceive them as not enough on their own, as not full persons deserving of just a fundamental right to life or liberty. And those same prejudices we saw back then, they impact this fight today. While no human rights tragedy of our past is equal to another human rights tragedy, I think we can all agree they are horrific. And the exact same arguments are made to justify abortion. They're not human. They're not fully human like us. We can't reverse course because our economy depends on it. We don't have the infrastructure in place to help all these people acclimate to our society. These are excuses, and they do not justify. Tonight we are at one of the most well-renowned, I have to watch my words, prestigious academic institutions in our world. Do you really believe that there is no other option, that nothing could be changed, invented, or transformed? There's no other options than prescribing a violent death on an innocent other in order to escape the burden of an unplanned pregnancy. You really believe you all can't figure this out? I reject that. And our entire pro-life generation rejects that. I want to end with reading a passage from one of my favorite books. It's a letter from Birmingham jail from Martin Luther King Jr. He wrote, "I have almost reached the most regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods, who paternalistic feels like he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by this myth of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. When we are working, when we say we are working to make abortion illegal again, we know what we're signing up for. It's going to be a long road. And what we're seeking is not simply the end, just the end of the killing, the negative peace as Martin Luther King described it. What we're seeking is a positive peace. But these efforts, which we know will have saved 200,000 children in just a few months, is worth it. And our motivation is pure. And it's very simple. Every preborn child matters because every human matters. And this, by the way, does include you, in case you haven't heard that lately. And the timetable for this is now. It's not later for peace. It's now for peace inside and outside the womb. And that, in making that happen, in making abortion illegal again, will restore respect for all humans. Questions? Oh, so question rules.
Perfect. So we have a mic over here, so if you guys can just go ahead and hop in the queue whenever you're ready to ask questions. Let's keep it to one question and make it an actual question. No ending in statements, please. And if you have a second question, hop in at the end of the line, and we'll probably get back to you. So go ahead and hop in right now.
You can ask me any question you have, or you can ask me a question that, someone's maybe asked you and you didn't know exactly how to answer it, or just tell me that you're not asking it, you're asking it for someone else you heard. So.
Okay. I don't know if this is on, but okay.
It's on, I think.
So Massachusetts is obviously a very pro-choice state, and Boston even more so, and then Harvard even more so there. And Olivia and I have struggled to find a way to begin this conversation in Massachusetts, because even the pro-choicers, as you can see, we don't have a lot of opposition tonight. They are so comfortable that they are not, there's no threat to losing their right to abortion. So I don't know if you have any ideas or ways to start this conversation in Massachusetts. Where do we start going from here in a state that feels so secure? They're not even willing to have conversation anymore.
Yeah, I think you do what you're doing tonight, right? You have provocative conversation. You have conversation that continues to stir up the debate, to make people to go, wait, what did they just say? I want to dig into that. I want to learn more, or I need to understand how wrong that they are. Why is somebody so wrongly saying this? That's good. And that's, change, especially when we're talking about massive cultural change, it only happens at the point of conflict. You can't have massive change without conflict. I'm sorry to say, all you peace-loving people, there is that, and that has to have conflict. And I know I'm sorry, but it is. And I think it's important as Harvard Right to Life. There's been I think this kind of thought in the process in the past of we're a certain level of academic caliber, and so therefore we're only going to engage in certain discussions, and we're not like all the other pro-lifers. And I think we have to be careful. No, people at Harvard are having abortions, and I would say the pressure to have abortion is even greater at Harvard because you spent this whole time trying to get into one of the most tough schools in the country. You're paying. Don't even know how much money now it is to go here. So there is an intense amount of pressure to say, well, there's no way for me to have this child. And so I think your goal continually here is to, press the buttons to create that tension that is needed to change minds. So having engaging events and dialogue and things like that. But then also on the flip side, to transform and ask questions as to what's happening here at Harvard. Where does she go if she becomes pregnant? Does she know where she needs to go? Is that advertised when there's student freshman orientation and she's told where the Planned Parenthood is and where to get condoms and where she can get her free abortion? Is she equally told where to go if she doesn't want to do that? or she wants to explore a different option. Can she live on dorms here on campus pregnant? Or does the school say it's too much of health and safety risk due to insurance to be pregnant on campus? What is it like if you're an athlete at Harvard? What is she told? Is she being educated on her Title IX rights that thankfully the Biden administration hasn't taken away yet? But we still have them, so we should protect them as long as possible. So I think it's kind of that twofold goal, but I do think it's pushing buttons. Mm-hmm. And you guys are doing that, right? You guys were out at the Women's March. I think that's important to do that. I think you guys need to do as much as you all can to be out there on campus, to be in the, do you have your quad? Do you have a quad or something? The green?
Yes, yeah, the quad's bad, but yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be in the yard. We'll be in the yard.
Yeah, that's right, Harvard Yard. Go in the yard and have constant tabling displays where people are like, oh, there's the pro-lifers again. Yep, there's the pro-lifers. And here we are again. And we're always going to be here. And we're going to be educating people about what abortion is and making you feel uncomfortable on your way to class, because you should feel uncomfortable. We should all feel queasy and uncomfortable about abortion every single day. Because if we don't remind ourselves what this is and what it does, we'll just forget about it. It's too terrible. It's too traumatic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us this evening. My question is just, what do you do about all the misinformation around ectopic pregnancies, and a bunch of even ER docs saying, oh, I can't treat this woman, et cetera. It's against these provisions, and what do you do about the misinformation, both for the sake of the pro-life movement, but also for individuals that are being turned away from emergency rooms and actually could be getting
those doctors should be prosecuted.
Yeah.
I mean, I am very concerned. There have been folks in the media scouring for state reports for a woman to die from an ectopic pregnancy. And they will do what they attempted to do in Ireland, and what they actually did do in Ireland, where the push for legalized abortion in Ireland, they used a horrific story of a mother who was pregnant. And I've read the stuff. It was oh my gosh, what the hospital did not do and what they should have done. It was terrible. But they used this case of one woman in Galway to make it a rallying cry for why they needed a legal abortion in the country. And that's exactly what they're doing. I was on NPR not long ago, and in the middle of my interview, they stopped my interview to play a clip from a doctor in Kentucky. He was like, I'm an emergency room doctor and I don't know what I'll do. I'm like, he should be prosecuted. If a patient presents with symptoms for ectopic pregnancy and you'd fail to act, your duty is to save life. That's why you're supposed to take a Hippocratic oath. That's what you're supposed to do. But I am very fearful that there's, especially for women who are on Medicaid or who don't have good health insurance, even though apparently supposed to Obamacare was supposed to help all of that, and it didn't. But I'm very concerned there'll be a pro-abortion liberal doctor in a red state who will use the case of a woman who goes to an emergency room, who doesn't have a regular OB/GYN, who hasn't been followed throughout her pregnancy, and will be like, I gotta wait, I gotta run this up legal, we'll see what the hospital says. It's Friday night, 11 o'clock, I don't know if the lawyer will get back to me. She'll die, and the abortion lobby will be very happy to use one woman's tragedy, one family's tragedy to justify the extremism of abortion. That's exactly what they're trying to do. But we've said all along, and we continue to say, there is no pro-life law that is introduced, that is written, that has the intention or even says that if a woman presents with a life-threatening situation, that she should not be able to get the care that she deserves. Because pro-lifers, we're actually about preserving life. And if you're not able to preserve the life of both patients, you as a physician have to at least preserve life of one, right? And that's a conversation, and sometimes mothers will choose to sacrifice their life for their child's life. And we've seen that, the stories of mothers who present with cancer and say, I don't want to go through the treatment, I want to deliver my child, and then I'll start treatment, and the mother tragically dies shortly after the birth of her child, but she made that choice. But the doctor gave her that choice. And nobody in the pro-life movement says that woman who's going to die should have to die, because that doesn't make sense. That doesn't even make logical sense, right? There is no way if a child is in an ectopic pregnancy that child can survive. We don't actually have the medical technology. I know there's doctors who've tried. They've tried to remove the child from the fallopian tube and tried to implant. We don't have the medical technology yet. So there's no way that child is going to survive. So why would anyone say she must also die too? Does that help?
Yeah, thanks so much.
You guys are so timid in your clubs.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Hawkins, for coming to speak to us. And I guess my question is, how do you respond to the more high-level philosophical personhood arguments? Mm-hmm. And especially, how do we make an argument that every single human life matters and that human life is distinct from all other kinds of life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, of course, we're at Harvard, so you want to ask a smarty question. No, first time I spoke here, to be honest with you, I was really nervous because I was like, I'm just a girl from West Virginia. Like, what am I going to do? And I realized your questions are the exact same as a high school audience, a community college, a state college. It literally doesn't change no matter where you're at. You might use bigger words, but it's the same. I think that is the fundamental difference. And I think if abortion activists and people who are pro-abortion were being intellectually honest with themselves, that is the debate we would be having, right? Not the debate of, it's not a human, it's not alive. Like, that's not scientifically unsound to say that, right? And we don't acknowledge that in any part of our society anywhere else except in the abortion operating room, because we have the Lacey and Connor Pearson law, for example. When women are pregnant, we celebrate, I'm having a boy, or I'm having a girl. But that's the fundamental difference. That's really where the debate is in pro-life versus pro-abortion, or anti-abortion versus pro-abortion, if I'm being consistent here. The debate is the child in the womb is not only human and alive, but the child in the womb has value, just like how we have value. And the pro-abortion movement's truthful argument is that it doesn't have the same value. Now, it depends on the person you're discussing it with, how much value they have. Their argument really is your value is determined based on your wantedness. If the mother wants you, then you have value. If the mom wants to have a baby and the husband kills her and the baby, oh yeah, we're good with charging murder for the husband, double homicide. But if the mother is pregnant and it doesn't want the baby, it'd be totally fine to go to an abortionist and end the life of the child. And their argument is, well, it depends on what the mother wants, because they're making a complete bodily autonomy argument. But what they're really saying is, it's not a full person. And we say it's a full person. The reason we say that is because when you start saying certain humans aren't persons, or certain humans only have a percentage of personhood, or you have to do something, or have the ability to do something else, or there's a plus added to, you have to be human plus this and equal to be person, that's a slippery slope, which our history and world history tells us never ends well. Because when a few can define what a person is, it's never going to end well. And I think you can also go into, and that's also a metaphysical argument, right? I believe that human beings were created in the image of a creator. And fundamentally, that's what gives us value. That's why I can eat meat. Because while I value animals, I don't believe a cow was made in the creator's image. Now, if I were an atheist, if I ever lose my faith in order to be consistent, I would have to say all life has value and I'd have to become a vegan. That would be sad for me. But we actually have employed students, like we've actually had on staff pro-life atheists, pro-life agnostics who are vegans, and I probably shouldn't joke because I'm their employer, but I'm like, oh, if you just accepted, Jesus Christ as your savior, you could go to Chick-fil-A with me. That doesn't go over really well, but they understand what I'm saying. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you for speaking.
Thanks for dressing up to match.
Yes.
I went to the pro-abortion town hall. It was town hall, right? And the whole conversation there was that, it's a human right. It's healthcare. It's helping the woman.
Yep.
And what I realized then was that, I've had these conversations, and every time we have the upper level debate of whether or not it's a human life or whether or not abortion is morally wrong, what's getting in the way is always emotional stakes.
Yep.
I've realized that it's always about whether or not I should have sex without consequences. So how do I address the biggest issue, well, you shouldn't force a mother to carry a child that's you wouldn't force anyone to do anything, really.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder how that child got there, and they don't want to have that conversation. So how do we
You should have my job.
bring it earlier?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, abortion is, and this is very controversial to say, it's a selfish decision. It's, I choose me over you. It's, I consented to an action, but I don't want to consent to the consequences. Unless you're talking about sexual assault, and that's, someone's going to try to be a smarty pants. I'm not talking about conception that occurs from sexual assault. You can't do that, right? Like, you can't go to Las Vegas, put all of your money for tuition down on a roulette table, lose all your money, and then go, I didn't consent to that. No, you did, because you put your money down on that table. You knew that was a high potential that you were going to lose your money, but you still did it. You can't, there's no take backsies. But that's exactly what it is. And I think that's honestly why the abortion debate is so heated. We hear it on campuses, right? Because it's not just, it's super easy to be against human trafficking. It's super easy to be against a lot of human rights atrocities. You put a bumper sticker on your car or a sticker on your laptop, and you're super cool and you're with everybody else, but you didn't actually have to change any of your behaviors. Many women who don't like abortion and who don't want to call themselves pro-abortion, who get very upset they get called pro-abortion, in the back of their mind, the thought is, I don't like abortion, I think it's wrong, I get an icky feeling about it, but it's my one parachute. It's my one parachute. And becoming pro-life, changing your view on the humanity of a child in the womb means that you may have to re-examine some of the actions that you're taking. Like, I'm not up here talking about your sex life. I don't want to know. Don't offer me details. And no one in the pro-life movement is actually even arguing we're trying to take away your awesome sex life that you claim that you're having. That's not my argument. By the way, married people and religiously devout people tend to have the best sex life. But whatever, I think the proof is in all of our children that we have in our huge vans. But I'm saying, if you want to have the best sex, get married and have sex with one person for the rest of your life. It only gets better, trust me. But my husband's not watching. But that's what it is, right? No one, I don't want to know, I don't care. I'm just saying, if you engage in behaviors that lead to a creation of a unique, whole, living human being, you don't get to take back that simply because you don't like the outcome, because you did consent to the actions that led to their creation.
Hi, thank you for coming to speak. I remember hearing shortly after Dobbs, there was an article going around about a 13-year-old girl who was raped and had to carry the baby or something. So if you have any experience with it, how do you respond to somebody who uses a very emotionally charged
Yeah.
article like that?
Yeah, it was actually a 10-year-old girl who was raped by, I think it was a legal immigrant. I think it was her mom's boyfriend or something. And she actually did have the abortion. The President of the United States went on live TV for 17 minutes yelling at how evil pro-lifers were because we want to force her to become a mother, and she was 10 years old. And in 17 minutes failed to once bring up the rapist. To once bring up, was the rapist caught? Was she safe from the rapist? Was he going to be punished? 17 minutes, and he didn't utter a word. Also, didn't say the word abortion in the entire 17 minutes. Go back and watch it. It was in July. I'll never forget it. I was filming a podcast. I almost had to take a walk. I was so angry. I think, I think the first thing you have to do as a pro-life advocate is to acknowledge the horror of rape when you're asked that question. Because a lot of times, I think the folks asking that question don't really care what you have to say about it. They just want to know, are you like a human who feels? And I think we have to acknowledge the horror of rape. And that, I can think of no worse thing to happen to my daughter, my sister, myself, than to be raped. And I think we as a society, and I think we do this, we don't do it enough, we have to be willing to do everything we can to support her. And we need to support those initiatives. But my support stops when you ask me to kill another human being. If I'm like having like an online debate with somebody, like those faceless ones where there's no human at the other end, and they get real snarky with me about this, one of the questions I like to ask people is like, oh, so you're in favor of rapists getting the death penalty, right? Because if you're in favor of a child being aborted, then you must be in favor of the rapist getting the death penalty. Our Supreme Court actually says that that's actually too severe a punishment for a rapist. So just to be clear, if you're in favor of abortion in cases of rape, you also should equally be in favor of the death penalty for an abortionist. And then I go into kind of the question of what are the other crimes you think a child must die for if their father commits them. If my father goes out and commits a rape tonight or commits an act of terrorism, should I or my sister be put to death? Are there other crimes that we say death of an innocent other is the appropriate punishment for the crimes of the father? I can't think of any. I also like to ask people when they bring up that question, and I've actually never had anyone do this. I'll say, because it's so emotionally charged, let's set that question of sexual assault, abortions in cases of sexual assault, which, by the way, 5% of abortions, 5% of sexual assaults can end in pregnancy, but 100% of those pregnancies do not end in abortion. It's about 50%. The automatic assumption for people is like, absolutely, 100% of women who are raped, who get pregnant, have abortions. That actually isn't true. But let's set that aside, right? Let's just set that aside. Will you agree with me that the 97% of all the other abortions that are committed for matters of convenience are wrong, or should be banned, or should be made illegal? Will you agree with me? If we'll set that aside, will you work with me on that? Find some consensus. I have never had an abortion advocate say yes. And that to me demonstrates the problem. That they are willing to try out the horror of rape in order to justify 100% of abortions. I think it's an extremely callous thing to do. So hopefully that helps you.
Thank you. It did.
Hi.
Hi, good evening. Good evening. You speak louder. As a man, many times the pro-choice movement always excludes men, as they do not have the right to care about the reproductive rights of women. Mm-hmm. And so, personally, I've struggled to even say anything back at that. So now, as a married woman, as a mother, how do you teach men to properly speak about this problem?
Yeah. I love how you guys keep bringing up and making me sound old. I'm a married woman. Thank you. One argument don't have a gender. People have genders. There are two. But arguments don't have genders. And I think that's important because you can make an argument no matter what gender you are. And I think it's a pretty ridiculous thing that to say that half of our society can't talk about. Well, they can talk about it as long as they're pro-abortion. Do you ever notice all the men at the women's marches? Because they're the ones who are the nastiest. They're the ones our bodyguards have to protect us from. It's the men's at the women's march. But no one ever gets mad at the men at the women's march because as long as they got a pro-choice sign, that's the appropriate thing for men. So if we're really being fair, there should be no men at the women's march. But they don't want that. What they're saying is, and what they're trying to do is use your gender against you to get you to be silent. And I would say, no. I have the right. And by the way, how dare you assume my gender? But I have the right. Because men can get pregnant too, right? Men can get pregnant too. It's pregnant people now. Know your terms. This is Harvard. But I have the right to speak out on a human rights atrocity. I think from a male perspective, it's extremely important that men step up and be men. I know I'm a misogynist here saying men should be men, but you really should. Men need to support the women in their lives who are pregnant. Because when you look at the Guttmacher statistics, the vast majority of women who seek abortion say the reason they're there is that they lack support from their partner. And by partner, they mean man. They're there because he doesn't step up. I was speaking 2 days ago at a Catholic pro-life event, and I didn't think I was speaking to like any young people. It was like all older people. And but there was a younger person in the audience who was there. He got a ticket, and it was interesting because he came up to me afterwards, and his girlfriend's pregnant, and she won't tell him whether or not she's going to have an abortion. And the agony of this man of saying, what can I do? I will take the baby. I will raise the baby. And for him to realize that he has no legal recourse. There's nothing he can do legally to stop her. But what he can do is he can be with her. He can be with her when she's taking the pregnancy test. He can be with her to take her to the Pregnancy Resource Center. If he can constantly ensure her that he will be with her, I think it's going to end well. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
I need water.
These are going to be our last two questions.
Okay. Sweet. Go because I don't have any water.
Hello, thank you again for your comments this evening. In conversations with friends who are pro-choice, many of them that I've seen have really good hearts and are honest seekers of doing the right. Maybe, confused as to what that is or where to find that, but I found are very honestly trying to do what's best for women, and to be pro-woman the best way that they know how to. And so my question with that is, do you see any ways where there are places where pro-choice and pro-life people can work together? Mm-hmm. Is there anything that sort of bridges where they can go forward to support women?
Yeah, I mean, we've proposed this on campuses for years. I know groups like Feminists for Life have certainly done the same of, all right, what about women who choose life? What are the resources here at Harvard? What is she told when she goes into the Women's Health Center or the hospital? What resources are she given? Are we promoting all of the pregnant and parent-friendly resources that Harvard has? That is something that pro-life and pro-choice people should be able to equally work upon. Because if they're pro-choice, one of the choices is choosing life, choosing to be a parent, or choosing to place an adoptive family. That is a choice. I sadly have rarely seen this work. Why? At the end of the day, is because they're about one thing. So I think you keep reaching out, you keep offering that, saying, hey, Harvard Right to Life is going to host a open forum this week about, we're going to go through the student handbook and find out what all the policies are. We're going to go through the guidelines. We invited, dean of students. We invited somebody from the Equity, Diversion, Inclusion Office to come. We're going to have an actual conversation about what inclusion looks like on our campus for pregnant and parenting peoples. Ask them to come. Ask the pro-abortion group to come. I'll be really surprised if they do. And I think that highlights what they're really about. They're about one thing: ensuring access to abortion.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you for speaking tonight as well. When it comes to having conversations with people who are against this topic, especially when it comes to them not viewing the validity of our points and whatnot, they also tend to not view the validity of the religious aspect and the religious point of it and the approach that people take on that.
Yeah.
So how would one combine those points to create a valid argument for someone that they may understand why things go about as they do?
Yeah, I mean, the argument I made tonight didn't bring up religion. I brought up religion once when I talked about why I think human beings are valuable and why I think they're more valuable than cows. But the rest of that my defense was not religious. It's a scientific fact that when two parts meet, a unique whole is created with a brand new genetic code that's never existed before and it never existed again. Scientific fact. It's also a fact that abortion is a violent procedure that ends the life of something that was living, that is no longer living, if the abortionist knows what to do and is good at their job. That is also a fact. The only part that in that discussion that comes up that is that can be religious is where do people get their value from? Most atheists that I've talked to, I have a podcast episode on this. I was interviewing one of my pro-life atheist friends, and she laughed because she said that it's only Christians that ever ask her, how do atheists know people have value? And I was like, well, it doesn't, like, where is the logic? Like, how, like, where is it founded? Where is your philosophical grounding that people have more value than animals? And her response was, we never talk about that. It's just always assumed. Of course it is. So, I mean, you could start with there of like, of course, human beings have value. And of course, human beings have more value than trees, than cows, than pigs. And if the person says, I don't believe that, one, they're probably not. They're probably living a pretty hypocritical life because it's pretty darn hard to go through life as a human, equally valuing all human life. I mean, like you're a mass murderer, like when you drive and you kill all these bugs. Like you don't even want to know. Try to drive through Georgia. It's crazy. So, I mean, now there's a question of intentional or, unintentional. So maybe you're not really mass murderer because you're not intentionally killing bugs, but maybe you didn't have to buy a truck that was so high. I don't know. But you can start the conversation of course, we know human beings have value. And they have more value than other species.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming this evening. As we know, abortion is being preached as women health.
Yep.
We know that is not right. So, and the women have this, thought that when they abort, that's it. Where are those psychological damage as a consequence of being doing an abortion?
Yeah, Patricia Coleman, who's kind of the preeminent researcher on post-abortion syndrome, did a meta-analysis that was printed in the British Journal of Psychiatry, not a pro-life source, a few years back. And it found that women, for all the risk factors, endured an 81% increased risk, women who had abortions, of psychological effects, mental health effects, whether that was alcohol dependency, drug use, suicidal ideation, or suicide attempts. It's, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, we don't have a national abortion reporting law. So when I go and look for studies, academic studies about the side effects of abortion, physical, or mental, I go to PubMed, which is NIH's websites like pubmed.nih.gov, and that's where you'll see all of the academic peer-reviewed studies on abortions, type of abortion, and they all populate. But most of those studies are actually international studies. So the Finnish government actually does a really good job of killing babies and reporting that. And so one of their studies found there's like a 3.5%, she was 3.5 times more likely to die within the first year versus women who had abortions versus women who gave birth. And they have a number of studies showing the suicidal ideation, the suicide attempts. I mean, it is actually shocking, some of the information that you see, but there is a complete gaslighting that does go on in the abortion industry. She's told you'll feel nothing but relief. You might feel a little bit of sadness, but that will actually go away. And that's what Planned Parenthood says on their website and their videos. And the point of that is, if you start to feel regret about your abortion, if you start having issues, it's you. You're the problem. It's not abortion. Abortion's good. Abortion's healthcare. It's you. And that's actually hurting women even more because there actually isn't a real discussion about abortion trauma, especially now in a post-Roe era. We have a lot of women and men who've had abortions, who had the icky feeling about it, still went through with it, and then for decades put it out of their minds. Now when abortion's being talked about all the time, now that the Supreme Court has come out and said that was an egregiously wrong decision, Roe versus Wade, we have millions of people right now who are having to, for the first time maybe in their life, rectify what happened 20, 30 years ago. And that's a hard place to be at for a lot of people, especially when all that they hear from the abortion industry time and time again is that there's nothing wrong with abortion. Abortion is healthcare. It's totally safe. You'll be totally fine. The problem is you. The problem is you. It's all you. Thanks. Thank you guys for coming tonight. I appreciate it.